Good evening. I'm attorney Lawrence Berliner. I'm an attorney in the field of special education law. And with me tonight is our co-host, Jane Faherty, who's the director of the JumpStart program, the Jewish Community Center in Stamford. And she's also a special education advocate. Jane and I will be moderating this webinar. It's hard to believe we've been doing this for 4 years, but we're continuing to do this to present Zoom webinars because we're part of a community of concerned parents and professionals, and we're still learning how to connect with one another. And for these past years, we've been moderating various webinars on a variety of topics and to address social, emotional, educational impact on a child's educational journey. And that need could not be greater than it is at this particular time. We try to empower the road ahead for parents and their children and professionals who are joining us as well to discuss what's on the minds of parents. Tonight, we're navigating the challenges that parents and students face with transition planning from high school to beyond high school for students with IEPs, individual with education plans, and to help parents who are going to be part of that journey. For every student with an IEP, there's a process of transition planning into the next step from elementary school to middle school, from high school to beyond post-high school. Tonight, we're focusing on that last step to prepare students for post-secondary education, employment, and as necessary, independent living. We're very fortunate to have our special guest tonight, Dr. Muncie Kardos, who will introduce. I'll have a brief introduction, and then we'll go into that topic for tonight. Before we begin, I do have a disclaimer. This webinar is being recorded. A copy of the webinar will be provided to each person who is registered. It's available on YouTube. And after the webinar is over, recordings will be available. The information in this webinar does not constitute specific legal, educational, or professional advice regarding you or your child's circumstances and should not be relied upon as such. The webinar does not establish an attorney-client relationship with attorney Lawrence Berliner, a professional relationship with Jane Faherty, the Stamford Jewish Community Center, Dr. Muncie Kardos as well. By signing up, you agree to receive emails about future webinars and events from the Stamford Jewish Community Center and or the law office of Lawrence Berliner, LLC. Zoom is a third-party provider and not an agent of or associated with the law office of Lawrence Berliner, the Stamford Jewish Community Center. Dr. Kardos, information provided during the webinar is based upon Connecticut state law policies and to a certain extent federal law. If you're watching this webinar from another state or another country, you need to consult the laws and policy that are in effect for your state or jurisdiction. And with that, Jane, how are you?
Hi, good evening. It's good to be back here, Lawrence, and good evening, Dr. Muncie Kardos. It's lovely to have you join us today. As Lawrence said, I'm the executive director of a program called JumpStart, which is located in the Stamford JCC, and also we have a classroom at the Maritime Odyssey Preschool located in Norwalk. This classroom typically supports children with developmental delays from ages 2 to 3. I then help those children transition into the public school. In addition to that, I have my own private advocacy business where I support children throughout their ages of education from K through 12. And so it's fantastic to have Dr. Muncie here, an expert in the transition process. Lots of families obviously get very concerned and anxious about it. And I think it's great for families also to start thinking about this ahead of time. So it's fantastic that you're here tonight to share this really valuable information with us in a landscape that, that is changing and evolving, in lots of different directions. So thank you very much for coming tonight. And we're looking forward to this conversation.
My pleasure. Glad to be here.
Sorry, one other housekeeping note. we have many questions that we received prior to tonight's webinar. If you're going to ask a question, please use the Q&A format at the bottom of your computer and not the chat. This webinar is being recorded, and what's in the chat is recorded. What's in Q&A is not. So to preserve privacy or confidentiality, we would prefer using the Q&A function. I've had the pleasure of knowing Dr. Muncie Kardos for many years as a transition evaluator. She became involved in special education over 30 years. After becoming an occupational therapist, she worked with many students who required assistive technology. In order to meet those needs, she went back to school and earned an advanced master's degree in occupational therapy with a concentration in assistive technology. She also became interested in the topic of transition planning and conducted research in that area. Following this, she went on to earn a doctorate in special education, focusing on students with disabilities who would require transition programming in order to move on into the adult world. Dr. Kardos's research has been published by the American Journal of Occupational Therapy. She has written and contributed to numerous articles on the variety of topics of special education. She has presented at professional conferences locally and across the country. In addition to consulting to school district, Dr. Kardos has taught graduate level courses in assistive technology and special education here in Connecticut. She's licensed as an occupational therapist in Connecticut. She holds national certification as an RESNA Assistive Technology Professional, ATP. She can explain what those acronyms mean. And until 2022, when she retired from providing assistive technology services, and now devotes herself entirely to transition planning. As I mentioned, I've known Dr. Kardos for many years, and how I know her is reading her transition evaluation reports, which for me are always illuminating and eye-opening to see how the needs of students with disabilities are not properly identified in IEPs in order to give them a solid down payment for that next step in life. So we'll be discussing parent concerns, including transition planning, who needs a transition plan, when that process should begin, who's best qualified to do it, what's included in a transition evaluation, and questions that should be addressed in a transition plan. And what are the options for transition services? Often we think of students graduating from high school and going off to college. Well, that may work for some students, but certainly not all students. And I hope we'll have time to hear some of the options that are available for students who may not go to a traditional four-year college, or at least immediately after high school. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Kardos, and you have the floor.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. And I don't have a formal presentation because there have been a lot of questions that have come in. And so I was able to see some of those questions and to kind of group them into a timeline of talking, planning from the time really from middle school to high school up and beyond. And when people say, when should transition planning begin? If I were doing a program, this is when I would flash up the picture of the babies in the little pink bonnet or blue bonnet in the hospital with the little blanket on them. But it's never too early, but it's never too late.
And in Connecticut, not other states, the transition planning process, at least officially, starts at age 14. It used to be 16, but now it's age 14, which means we may be starting the transition planning process while students are in middle school and not waiting for them to be in high school. Is there any difference between transition planning for, say, an 8th grader versus a 9th or a 10th grader?
Yeah, absolutely. When you're going from middle school to high school, it's really time to start thinking. We always have to think start with the end in mind. And your child is your child going to be on a more academic track? Are they really going to go that way in high school, or are we going to look at some point to add in some, life skills or functional skills, and to start to think about, which one of those two directions will we go in at some point? Also, when transitioning from middle school to high school, we really need to think about other things besides academics, the social component, and the ability to take care of yourself in a larger setting. Things like, being able to can you withstand the noise? Can you go through the changes of class? There's a lot of different things there, and so it's a time to really think about you're going into a different environment. There's going to be different expectations. There can possibly be a lot more teachers than you've had before, and really to look at that whole picture of how is life going to change for my child, and how can we best meet those needs.
We've had some questions that are specific to a student's primary disability. For example, somebody presented a question for a child or student with autism who has severe social impairments. And the question is, do we delay high school graduation due to social needs, work, and living supports? Do you have any suggestions for that family?
Certainly, that is something that you can choose to do. At one point, it's always thought that if you could graduate, if you could pass all the tests and earn all your credits, then you were done and you move on. But so many students who can do exactly that can't really function out in the adult world. They don't have the skills that are going to make them employed. They don't have the skills that will make them successful in post-secondary education. They don't have the skills that will make them successful in recreation and leisure. And it can be a time where really some individuals really kind of start an adulthood of isolation, because they don't have the skills to be able to move into the adult world, and to enjoy it, and to be accepted in it, and to be successful in it. And so that's a big part of education in general. But it's also a very big part of what we do in the transition portion of someone's program in their IEP.
I look at IEPs in the transition section in particular. We're supposed to identify the student's interests and preferences, and we're supposed to use age and developmentally appropriate assessments to identify needs and eventually goals and objectives. Are there any particular transition assessments that you use in order to identify students' strengths, weaknesses, their preferences, and establish goals and objectives for an IEP?
All of my evaluations, really kind of the infrastructure always has to be three components. It doesn't matter what your disability is, what your skills are, what the projection is for, what your life is going to be going down the road. But we have to, we have to have three components. You always have to have the parent component to it. And so we need to know, what are the parents' concerns? What are the things that they want for their child? What do they understand even about moving into this? So I always have a meeting with parents, and get the parent perspective. Uh, I always see the child where they are. I don't have people say, "Can I come to your office?" No, because you'll be coming in my car. I don't have. I have to go out and I have to see you. I want to go and observe you in your class. Um, Whatever you're doing. The more you do, the more I like to go. So if you're going out in community, if you're cooking, if you're going on a field trip, I like to see in motion. If you are really, going through your a more academic track, I'm going to see you sneak in the back of your classroom. And then I always meet with the student one-on-one. Once I meet with the student one-on-one, then I, having read the file and spoken with the parents, I have a pretty good idea of how that interaction will go. And then based on what I've learned up to that point, I'll select different assessments to use with the student. And then from there, then I will always meet with the team. And the team will also complete some assessments for me, people who know the student well enough to speak to their strengths and their needs. Will give me the information. I have them fill out a couple of assessments. Parents also fill out some assessments for me. And then I put it all together and come up with recommendations. First, to identify the student's level of performance in the transition planning areas. So, what do they know about post-secondary education? What do you know about the world of work? What do you know about getting a job? Have you ever had one? And what about your independent living? Do you have friends? Do you go out with your friends? Are you able to go places with other people? Can you stay home alone? What is your social life like? Can you make yourself a sandwich? Can you take care of yourself in that capacity? What's your social skills, et cetera. And so when I have all of that, then I can make recommendations for going forward. What should be included in the plan to prepare you now for post-secondary education? And what should post-secondary education look like for you? This is when I read the IEPs and I see post-secondary education preparation and goals and objectives and even the post-school outcome. Well, there's kind of a misunderstanding kind of across the board that post-secondary education means lifelong learning. And so it's not just college. It can be college. It can be a vocational school, learning, how to be a medical assistant or a car mechanic, accessing things that are in your community. You know, learning Zumba, taking yoga, going to art classes and cooking classes. All of that is post-secondary education. And so when people kind of sometimes get stuck in, gee, what is this all about? So that's what I focus on there, and what might post-secondary education look like for this individual. I think we always have to be realistic when we set up a plan, and then also recommendations for post-secondary employment. And the question there is it likely that this person will become competitively employable, either on a part-time or full-time basis? Or is it more likely that employment for this person will take place in a supported or a volunteer capacity? And so those are two roads to kind of look at, or two areas to look at when we start to develop a plan for a student. And then the independent living. I think at one time people really looked at this and interpreted it as like personal activities of daily living. Can you brush your teeth? Can you get yourself dressed? Can you do those kinds of things? But our independent living skills are so much broader than that, and they cover such a vast area, and they are really what make a lot of people successful, and not necessarily their academic skills. And in fact, there's fairly recently, some research done that students with autism, it was done, who have IQs in the normal range, the true predictor of success is their adaptive skills. And it's not unusual for me to meet a student who is in all general education classes and making their A's and B's and fulfilling all those requirements. And then when we look at their adaptive skills, they're consistent with someone who would be performing academically at a much different level. And it's those adaptive skills that are going to really make you or break you.
And this was a question that we had before the webinar, and it kind of lends into what you're talking about, people's strengths and weaknesses. So sometimes their strengths mask some of the things that we need to work on, but also you mentioned looking at the environment that's going to best suit you. So the question we had was identifying and exploring transition programs that offer virtual participation. Is that something that is available to parents and the students?
You know, I honestly don't have a lot of experience with programs that are virtual, other than what we had to do during COVID. And I do know that they exist, but I'm not all that familiar with them. I haven't really seen any research on them or any outcomes, or even known anyone who has gone that route, and has, you know, some information to share on it. So, like, can't really expand on it any more than that. I'll tell you the one good thing about virtual is that it makes it easier to be able to meet with parents and meet with school teams in the course of what I do, because, you know, this is how we interact with people now. It's not considered hocus pocus anymore.
We've had a couple of questions about resources, if there are any. I neglected to point out that in the chat section, our contact information for Dr. Kardos, myself, and Jane are available. And you'll see resources for February 13th. And we've posted resources to the State Department of Education, ct.gov, and the United States Department of Education, ed.gov. And those resources include a transition bill of rights, which is peculiar to Connecticut, the core transition skills, which are also peculiar to Connecticut, and the United States Department of Education Guide to Post-Secondary Transition Planning, which is about a 50, 75-page document that applies to all 50 states. So there are, and in addition to what we didn't post, the Connecticut Department of Education does have some transition resources on their website. Do you have any other resources besides the public ones I mentioned?
I think that those are probably the most prevalent. Did you mention the national transition?
The U.S. Department of Education guideline booklet on transition.
It's the National Transition Association or organization. They have, that's a good resource too. And there's another one that's will come to me about probably 3 o'clock in the morning. It will come to me. I'll think of it. But the way that I really learned about transition planning was kind of funny, I guess. But my daughter at the time was in high school, and she had disability. And someone on the team said, you know, we need to start getting ready and talking about transition planning. And I said, oh, yes, of course. And then I went home and I just started reading about it. I Googled everything that I could find. And that was really how I initially made the connection as an occupational therapist to the, you know, to the more active side of transition planning. And so many of the things that were covered, I thought, wow, you know, this is what I already do. And how can this get done in a school? And so that was kind of what set me on this path to where I am now.
Well, another question that we had in this evening was, for college-bound students, what high school documentation is helpful to discuss when getting support at the college level?
Okay, so before the high school student leaves, exits, walks out the door with the diploma, there is going to be prepared the summary of performance document. And I always suggest that the student is involved in that directly. And what that is essentially is it's a listing of the accommodations that you used in high school that made your curriculum accessible to you. So these are things that are going to be usually offered in college. We're not talking about modifications, but we're talking about accommodations. And so you leave with this summary, this document that lists the accommodations that you needed. And so the students should always be aware of that and involved in that. And in addition to that, they should have their most recent set of testing, whatever is done, usually it's from the last triennial, that specifically identifies their disability and suggests the kind of supports that they're going to need.
And that's very important because colleges and universities are often looking for documentation that's 2, but not more than 3 years old. So you want to make sure you have the most up-to-date evaluation data recommendations that's less than 2 years, but not more than 3 years. So that's what the colleges require. And when you're looking at colleges, make sure you bring your child along as well to meet not only the professors and the amenities of the college, the dormitories, but also to go to the Office of Students with Disability Services to make sure they are aware of your child and ensure that your child, who's probably going to be age 18 at that point in time, is following up, because colleges want to talk to the student. They don't want to talk to the parents. And it's very important that students have a good set of self-advocacy skills. They understand their strengths and weaknesses, and they know how to get from point A to point B as they're navigating any post-secondary environment, especially at college.
On the other end of the spectrum, we had another question of somebody who has a child that is 20 and is currently in a vocational program with special needs. What will be available for individuals such as this after that program is completed?
Well, after they, if they're I'm assuming that they mean that they're still under public education with that question. And so when they either finish and they exit public education, either by getting a diploma, taking their diploma, or if they age out from the end of entitlement, then it's going to be based on whether or not you qualify for services from DDS, Department of Developmental Services. If you do, then you will transition under their umbrella, and you will learn what services would be available to you based on assessment that the organization would do called the level of need. And based on your level of need, they'll come up with supports and plan and a budget to support that individual after. If the student does not qualify for DDS, we do have BRS, which is the Bureau of Rehab Services. And that, to oversimplify it, is like an employment agency for people with disabilities. So they will work with that person to help get them placed into a job. But if you're not under DDS, you have BRS. Some individuals may qualify for services under DMIS, which is the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services. I can tell you that I am not as knowledgeable about those services as I am familiar with DDS services. But that is an avenue for individuals who do not have an intellectual disability and who do have mental health diagnoses to seek supports.
We had one question come in, speaking of DDS, where we have a student in 10th grade and they want to prepare for independent living. If we are approved by the Department of Developmental Services, my take on that question is eligible. You have an entitlement to special education. You don't have an entitlement to the Department of Developmental Services. You may be eligible, but that doesn't automatically mean you're going to have a complete array of services from DDS. It's based upon available funding, which the demand exceeds the funding. So it's very, very important to prepare now for post-secondary independent living, employment, and education, rather than assume the Department of Developmental Services or a private provider agency, that's usually how the department provides the services, will have a complete array of services. So it's important to work on this right now today if your child is in high school, in order to prepare them for skills that they will need post-high school. And speaking of post-high school, we've had 2 questions involving the age 18 student. And what parents should understand, when students become 18, they are legally considered an adult in the eyes of the law. And I have parents who say, well, but my son or daughter has an IEP. Well, that doesn't change the fact they're 18. If they cannot make informed decisions about their future, medical care, employment, releasing records, places of abode, in Connecticut, we have the probate court, which could be explored with either a legal guardian for a person with an intellectual disability or a conservatorship for people without intellectual disabilities. We have 2 ways of doing this in Connecticut. Or get another kind of document, possibly a power of attorney, or some other way that parents can share the decision-making process. And when you're advocating for a student who's age 18 or over, you want them to take on some of that responsibility. I think that's what Dr. Kardos was talking about. You want to see the student in their environment. You know, are they able to, I can be very simple. I've seen transition plans. Can the student use a crosswalk safely? Do they know the difference between 211 and 911? Do they have money management skills? On and on and on. So it's very, very important that we're trying to empower, not the parents, we are doing that through our webinar, but we're trying to empower the student, because at some point in time, they need to take over and completely, or as much as possible, their own decision-making, their own care plan for life after high school.
If a student or the parent are dissatisfied with the transition program offered by their district, what other options are there for them to explore, or maybe to supplement the school program with?
Well, there really are several different, I'm just going to talk generically of the kinds of transition programs that exist. We have public school programs, and those are public, programs that are developed by the district. Sometimes districts that are extremely small may pair up with each other and make a program for multiple districts. But a public school program is one in which it's going to operate on a public school day, on a public school calendar. It's going to, operate during a regular school day hours. And when you're done, when you either reach the point of where it's time for you to leave because you want to graduate and take your diploma, or you age out, then you're back at home and you're starting all over again, either with, another agency, or hopefully you've had skills that you can go out and get a job, or you're in a job. Then we have private programs, and these programs are located again all through this country. There's no shortage of them. And private programs are exactly that. They're run by private schools, programs, they're private entities, and those are, it's a fee for service. Those programs have a tuition, and they differ. Some are day programs, an awful lot of them they'll have a residential component to it, because they're wraparound programs. We're looking for 24/7 kind of support, so that individuals learn, have a better opportunity to learn in context their needs for independent living skills. And then we have adult service programs. Adult service programs will operate from the age of 18 up for the rest of your life if you qualify for services with them. And those two are sometimes the funding comes from the Department of Developmental Services through different agencies. And sometimes that funding then comes out of, private pay. But those are programs that you don't ever have to leave if you, can meet the qualifications to stay there and if you have a source of funding for it. So that's really kind of, a parent can go and look for different programs. And you always want to keep in mind, where is my child going to be at the end of this? Some of the advantages to a public school community program is that the people in your community and the people in your community know you. And when the program is over, you have those established relationships, and sometimes you can get a job that way. You're just more familiar. You learn how to navigate your own community and your neighborhoods and all. When you're in private programs, those programs too are going to have an end. And if you're in a private program that's, away from your home, outside of your geographical area, when you come back, if you come back to your home, you don't have those kind of relationships established. And so you're, out looking for a job and navigating your community. And it's all new on both sides of that. And then with adult service programs, if you remain there, very often you can transition into a living arrangement that's close to where this program was that you were in, and you can continue to get supports through them.
If you're paying for private services, is there funding that you can access to pay for those programs?
No, they're tuition based, and some private school programs will have may have scholarships or other means of financial aid to support individuals through their programs. And then in adult service programs, if you qualify for, state funding from, it's usually Department of Developmental Services, that funding can be used to pay for services from that agency.
Yeah, there's two types of funding sources. If a student is placed in a day or residential transition program through the PPT process, in other words, the IEP specifies the out-of-district placement, that responsibility is borne by the school district. But if we're dealing with private organizations, and then one of the questions we had tonight, and it's beyond the scope of tonight's meeting, are Medicaid waivers. In Connecticut, we have several Medicaid waivers for people with autism, traumatic brain injury, developmental disabilities, intellectual disabilities, I should say, and a couple of others. And these are all tied to being under asset, can't have more than, I think, $1,600 in the bank. You have to be Medicaid eligible. You can't make too much money. You have to be on supplemental security income, or SSI, because what the state Department of Developmental Services and other agencies that use these Medicaid waivers is they're paying for the cost of the service, but they can recoup from the federal government approximately 50% of the costs. And that's why in many parts of the state government that's providing what I'll call social services, the demand exceeds the supply. There's a very long waiting list at the Department of Developmental Services for their autism waiver program and their intellectual disability program. I'm not familiar with some of the other agencies because I primarily am dealing with Department of Developmental Services, DDS. So there are financial planners out there. There are special needs trusts. There are people that handle Social Security, in particularly SSI cases. But as I said, that's beyond the scope of tonight's topic.
Are there any additional supplemental assessments, evaluations that parents should be asking for a school district to provide during this transition process so they can be equipped with more information before a child exits?
Well, sure, they can always call me. Um, I think as a parent, you know, you need to you know your own child. And again, we're kind of looking at, well, what are the, you know, what's the end in mind? But I always would encourage parents to really make sure that your child has measures of social functioning, social emotional functioning, adaptive skills. So because those are the things that can kind of fly under the radar for a long time, and then really once a child is in a different setting, um, particularly like a college or away from home, those kinds of things can really come to light as not having been addressed. So you want to make sure that we really cover all of the bases. When I do an evaluation, I'm not a standalone. You know, I'm part of all that needs to be done. We need that academic piece done. We need that psychological piece done. Um, and we need to know where we are in terms of having those transition skills.
What advice do you have for parents that might have one understanding as to who their young child is and the path that might be the most suitable for them versus the student that might have a different set of goals and ideas and objectives for what their future path trajectory might be? How do you help families, or what advice do you give to families navigating those differences of opinion?
Yeah, that's always it's pretty often, pretty frequent that, you know, the student will have a different idea of different outcome. And so really we kind of like, all right, this is, you know, this is your dream, and but let's kind of come back to where we are now with the reality, and let's look at developing the skills that would help you in that some aspect of that area of interest that you have.
We had two questions about when to ask for a transition plan, or another one, we live in a small district that doesn't have transition programs. You don't have to ask for a transition plan. If your child has an IEP starting at age 14, the school district is required by federal law to start the transition planning process, often starting with an evaluation, an assessment of interests, preferences of the student, not the school, using developmental and age appropriate transition assessments. And I'm sure there's a whole laundry list that Dr. Kardos could provide us, but it has to target at post-secondary education, employment skills, and if necessary, independent living. Now, I think it was touched upon before, if you live in a district without a transition program, maybe there is a nearby district the school district can partner with. But it's very important that students starting at age 14, most definitely by the time they're reaching, you know, the end of the traditional 4 years of high school, that they have a path forward. And I should point out that the age of eligibility in Connecticut and several states is through the end of the school year when the student turns age 22. And in Connecticut, we have several age 18 to 22 programs specifically designed for now young adults with disabilities who have an IEP. And it's very important that the student at age 18 realize that they're in the driver's seat. They may want to share the driver's seat with their parents or some other trusted adult to help navigate this process of transition planning. And it's important to understand that once a student graduates from high school with a regular education diploma, that ends the school district's legal responsibility to the student. So sometimes we have what's called a social graduation They go through 4 years of high school, they graduate with their class, they do all of the end of the year activities, but the one thing they do not receive is the regular high school diploma. That will be issued at a later date, because once the diploma is issued, the school district has no further responsibility. And somebody had asked, what's the difference between transition planning when the student's in high school and after high school? We're talking about transition planning in high school because there's a mandate from the federal government, the Individuals with Disabilities Act, requiring school districts to do transition planning. And Dr. Kardos, I don't know, do you do any transition plannings post high school when there's no longer a mandate?
Not no, not after they age out. Actually, I just had someone contact me today about that question specifically. But that is not an area that I practice in.
Okay.
To your point, Lawrence, I've had families contact me where their children have taken the decision, the family have taken the decision for their child to graduate high school with their peers, then they've intended to take a gap year and then wish to come back into a school district after a gap year. Do you have many parents talking to you about gap years and how to use that time?
What are you talking
Muncie, yes, sorry.
No, I don't. I have parents who occasionally ask about those kinds of programs, gap years programs specifically as being a transition program. But that's really kind of outside, I think, of the realm of special education programs, transition programs. Gap years are often include students who don't have IEPs, but who aren't ready for a variety of reasons. I'm more familiar with your transition programs, and that's how that's what their designation is, as opposed to gap year. But once you leave public school, if you have that diploma in your hand, you are not coming back. Even if, it suddenly you and your family realize, I can't get a job, I can't take care of myself, I can't, that's unfortunately, that's the outcome we're not supposed to have anymore, because we have this transition planning and we have extended years and ages that you can remain in school.
Well, this is very important. I had attended a holiday party many years ago, and the speaker was trying to figure out how we could improve special education in America, and looked around the world for a model and found that England had a wonderful model where basically you had wraparound services from approximately birth to approximately age 25. And the person next to me was running an adult program, and he said age 25, so that means I can get the person through high school, get them through college, community college and whatever, and they'll genuinely be ready for life after high school, because they have as many opportunities as possible to develop those skills through age 25. So I facetiously said to him, I guess you're going to be opening up a branch in England. So
But the shame of it is too, and we know neurologically that a lot of young people, their frontal lobes don't fully develop until, beyond age 22. So it is a shame in part that some of their opportunities are not aligned to maybe their physiological, their own physiological development. But not that we're here today to change the exiting age within the public school, but it is a shame that not all young people are prepared already at age 22, and neither of their families either at that point.
And,
that's correct.
transition programs don't have to be exclusive, either or, that they're going to be, we're just functional programs, we're just working on, life skills, we're just working on, employment skills. There are a number of hybrid programs, both through public schools and through private programs, that are incorporating actually having the student go to college at the same time. So they may be taking a class. We're usually then accessing the community college. And so they may be starting to take a class, and the advantage to some of those programs, some of them are located right at the college. Sometimes it's a hybrid where the student is there, and then there's another place where they meet to get their support outside of school. And so they have that opportunity to have the college experience, but to still have that base of support, when you need it to get through it. At the community college level, these students may start out by taking what we call developmental courses, where they're not the full credit courses yet, but they're kind of that bridge course to get in one, maybe learning how to go to college, how to navigate the what's there. And so that's an option too, that it has become more and more available as time has gone on.
That's an excellent point. I've had several students who have going to a community college as part of their IEP. So if they're on track, or they're supposed to be on track for post-secondary education at a 2 or 4 year college, what's the best place to learn about college, but at college, not sitting in a high school classroom or transition classroom and dealing with it as a hypothetical. Because one of the many things students with or without IEPs don't realize is how radically different college is from high school. And I was just talking about this earlier today with another family. And I said, our students go to high school 30, 40 hours a week, and they may have 10 hours a week of homework. Well, that flips around in college. They may go to class 10 hours a week and they have 30 or 40 hours of independent study and research. Do they have the executive function skills, the planning skills, the research skills, the study skills, the note-taking skills, on and on? And the parents said, wow, I wasn't thinking. I just thought you go off to college and they'll figure it out. Some do, some don't. We had 2 quick questions. My son is 14. We had a PPT meeting and they have not brought up the transition evaluation or plan. Ask. It's required at age 14. When do you age out of special education in Connecticut? The school year that you turn age 22. So if you turn age 22 in September, you're eligible through June of that year.
The other piece that I want to talk about too is meaningful employment. So what we should be looking for all the way through an IEP, in middle school and high school particularly, is what skills are we going to be providing the student with to have meaningful employment. I know some high schools have programs where they push cart coffee machine, that they push around the high school, and I'm helping a young man right now who has no interest in selling coffee in his future, or even working in hospitality. And so don't be afraid to, I understand some of the skills that you might be developing during that routine or those exercises, but don't be afraid to challenge, that you want your student to have meaningful employment, and look at the skills that they're going to need to have for meaningful employment, and an area that they truly are interested in, and listen to what they have to say about that as well.
And
Well,
one thing
I was just going to say, it's the interest and preference of the student, not of the school, that matters.
Yeah, and I always talk about the difference between task and skill. Task is what you do. It's putting the coffee in the cup or whatever it is. Task is what you do. But skill is what keeps you employed. And so most students can learn a task, and many students can learn, task and learn it fairly well. But whether or not they may be employable is going to be based on that skill. And the skill is what enables you to be employed, to obtain a job and to keep that job. And skill, allows you to take what you know with the task and to then to be able to adapt it and to apply it into other settings. So I always stress the teaching of marketable job skills. If for a student who will become or has the potential to be competitively employed, we should be working on marketable job skills with them. And their day should not be filled of where they're taken someplace where there's a pile of things that the people leave for the kids to do when they come in from the high school. Is they really need to develop, marketable job skills. And, there's a lot of tasks that in and of themselves are not a full-time job. So.
One question we had, how do you expand transition skills so they're not more than what's, quote, boilerplate? A transition plan starts with the letter I. I means individual, and it has to be based upon the student's unique individual needs, and that can be done with school-based assessments, private evaluations such as Dr. Kardos, situational assessments, putting a student in a situation and seeing how they do in a real world situation. Any other way to identify the student's interests, preferences. I have students, they want to do such and such when they get out of high school. I said, do you know what you need to do? I had a student many years ago, he wanted to go into heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, HVAC. And he's in my office, and I said, well, do you know anything about HVAC? He said, yeah, I know a lot about HVAC. I said, and I'm sitting over under an air conditioning vent. I said, what is above me? He says, I don't know. I said, that's an air conditioning vent. That's part of HVAC. So we need to look at practical skills, realistic skills, functional skills. That's where Dr. Kardos talked about the adaptive behavior assessments to make sure we have social skills, money management skills, transportation skills, anything that's going to get us from point A to point B in our lives.
I was just going to say, I also look at the practical side of things. It's like when we've been teaching students how to use dollars and cents and coins. I mean, the reality is today, mostly people might use credit cards or Apple Pay. We don't really, do students really need to be able to count out nickels, dollars and cents at a cash register. It's more important for them to have the functional skills of how to balance and actually know, their decimal places and what it means, what does a dollar look like on a credit card statement or when it shows up on the when you sign for the cash register. So start challenging even at a fairly young age some of those really functional life skills, and don't be afraid to. The same with analog clocks and digital clocks. Some students can have the analog clock on their IEP for many years and still not grasp that concept, but can read a digital clock. So don't be afraid in the formative years of a child's education to really start challenging some of these life skills, which are really going to make the difference between, acquiring skills that are employable versus ones that, they might not actually need access to. So just revisit your IEP and the goals and objectives that have been set for your child or for a student.
We're close to our appointed hour of ending our webinar. I want to thank all of our participants who've stayed throughout the webinar and for your questions. I know there are several we haven't had time to get to. So I want to thank you for joining us this evening and for your tremendous response to our webinars. Our next Zoom webinar will be on a special education and advocacy roundtable. We'll look forward to getting your questions. It'll be more general. We're going to try to extend that webinar to 7 o'clock to 8:30 to try to get questions. Allie Grafman will be our special guest. She's a special education advocate, founder of ABC Advocacy. We may have somebody else, but we're starting with Ally. And if you found this evening's webinar informative, please don't hesitate to register for the next webinar. And if you have YouTube channel available to you, this webinar will be posted after tonight on YouTube. Jane and I will keep a watchful eye on developments in special education issues and health-related issues as well. I saw there was a new guidance on COVID-19 that just came out today, which I hope none of us will have to experience. I want to thank Dr. Kardos and Jane for their collaborative efforts tonight, and also my daughter Rachel, who's off camera, who is putting all this together. Without my daughter, we wouldn't have these webinars and registration and all the technical behind the scenes work that allows these to happen. So Jane and Dr. Kardos, do you have any concluding remarks?
I just want to thank Dr. Kardos for coming tonight. It's been a really interesting conversation, and parents always have questions regarding the transitional process and are very intimidated by and fearful about what's ahead. So thank you for coming along today, and it's good to know that they can contact you for evaluation so they can have really a deeper dive and understanding as to what the next steps could and should maybe look like. Thank you again to Rachel, and also a thank you to Debbie, who's Lawrence's wife, who reaches out and helps to collaborate and bring our guests on board for this webinar series. And just wanted to say to everybody, don't forget we have a JumpStart social media on Facebook and Instagram. JumpStart is a collaborative partnership between the Stamford JCC and STAR, where we offer educational resources such as this webinar, but also social activities. We have one this Friday. I think it's located in Stamford, which is yoga and candles and an opportunity to come together, connect and meet in person, other parents and caregivers. Typically it is more the females that pop along, but gentlemen are welcome as well. So that's a social recreational event on Friday. We also have a meet and greet tomorrow at Westport Library at 10 o'clock. And I'll be there if anybody wants to meet me in person. So check out our social media. We do like to bring people together in person for free to just come and build that sense of community virtually as well as in person. So thank you for coming tonight, and thank you, Dr. Kardos.
Yeah, thank you. It's been my pleasure to be here. I love to talk about transition planning, and I really appreciate that you have these webinars, and I've enjoyed being here, and I'm available at my website as well if anybody needs to get in touch with me. And thank you for inviting me tonight.
Well, thank you. Stay healthy, stay safe on this snowy evening, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Okay. Good night.